Hey, Robert, it's good to have you with us. Thanks for taking time to let me interview you. I'd just like to ask you a few questions, and we'll keep things fairly reasonably brief, but hopefully have a chance to come back and ask you more questions later. Let me start with, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, kind of where you came from, what you've been up to?
Sure. Number one word for my background is eclectic. As you well know, Hugh, I'm from the Midwest. I'm a University of Michigan grad, and I had a funny combination of things that I studied. I was studying English and art history, and I was performing as a singer-songwriter every weekend to support my college habit. And of course, my father thought I was crazy. English, art, music, what are you going to do with any of that stuff? But ultimately, that little mashup turned out to be a pretty good one. I realized the other day I'd actually graduated 30 years ago from college, which was a little bit shocking. And I've really spent most of that time in marketing, starting at a mid-sized ad agency where I wrote copy for a while. I touched on graphic design. I did music and broadcast production. But over those first year or two, I was realizing I was a little different than a typical creative. And the difference was I cared about results. I always asked, what are we trying to do with this campaign? What are we trying to move? What are we trying to make happen? And pretty quickly, they corralled me and moved me right into account services. And I became the director of small accounts for this ad agency. And that turned me into a de facto marketing and PR strategist, which I never expected. It just happened. So 5 years into that world, became clear that working for other people wasn't necessarily the best path for me. I opened my own ad agency. And since then, it's been kind of a crazy ride because very interesting, touched on just about every industry. When I look back, I'm happy to have helped literally hundreds of small and mid-sized companies. And my focus has always been, how do I help them grow? The bigger clients, I've had plenty of them. People, the Sprint, Logitech, Touchstone, Viacom, Amway, GM, people like that. Harder to make a big difference in that world. So a lot of time the small to medium business ends up being a really rich place to be. I did a little sidebar into music. Again, I had an indie record label and then got into film production, doing music videos and fundraising films for nonprofits. We gotten eclectic enough yet. Ultimately, though, it was that fundraising work and the music videos that pulled me back to film, back to video, and ultimately to the web.
Well, that's great, man. That is eclectic. I like that. That's good. Well, tell us, because you tell us about Voodoo Viral, the company that you're working with now. I'd love to hear more about that, how it's sort of where you've ended up and what you're working on these days.
Sure. Well, the elevator pitch is that Voodoo is a cloud-based online marketing and sales platform with a strong emphasis on video. Of course, that's just a bunch of technical gobbledygook to me, ultimately. What we're really talking about is, how do you communicate effectively on the internet? And a lot of people do ask us, well, why did viral work its way into your name? Voodoo Viral, what's that all about? And the answer there is that literally the company came about because of a referral generation tool that a friend of mine and I kind of masterminded. And we called it Referral Magic. We were sitting in a sushi bar one day and we sketched it out on a napkin. And I said, that's amazing. We could build a business on that. And the next thing you know, we literally built a business on it. So we've been in business for about 5 years. And I've realized that over time, as we've developed our platform and tried to make it as robust a platform as possible for using email connected to video, or connected to anything else that you might want to send somebody to communicate effectively. It's really almost like Voodoo's become more of a philosophy. It's how do you communicate effectively and automate as much of that process on the web. There's a ton of really advanced marketing platforms out there, and we don't really even try to compete with most of those. They're no better than the content you put in them. So for us, it really relates a lot to content. Let me think of an example. Say an email campaign. A lot of platforms are going to be telling you, giving you templates for beautiful graphics, logos, and all the other things that they think are professional and pushing brand identity and all that. In our case, the Voodoo way is more about personalization. It's about making it look like that email is coming from a real person and written by a real person. Because our measurements over and over show that approach, true personalization is going to produce greater response. There's going to be greater satisfaction. There's going to be loyalty. Ultimately, there's going to be more sales. So that's what it's all about. It's back to results.
No, that's great. Okay, that's great. What is it about using video? Like, what is it about video that's so compelling that attracts, that you found so powerful? Do you think what makes it that way with people that are using it for marketing?
I mean, to me, it's pretty simple. Video lets you tell a story and engage whoever this person is, whether you call them your visitor, your reader, your viewer, whoever they are. Video engages them in a different way because it has a multi-dimensional quality. You know, you've got all of these different senses you can play with. You've got the visuals, you have words, you have music, sound effects. When we're on the web, we have interactivity, which is great. What's interesting about video, though, is what's not compelling on the web is hype or traditional interruptive TV commercials. You know, they do not work well on the web, and we still have people trying to push them through this new medium, relatively new medium. And it gets to be interesting to me as someone standing both in the thick of it and then occasionally looking at it from the sidelines. I always think, really, you're going to try to push a commercial at me and think that's going to engage me and make me happy, make me want to interact with your brand? It doesn't seem to work that way. So from the Voodoo standpoint, we have they're really unwritten rules, but for us, it's all about pushing content. If we're going to be pushing, we want to make sure it's relevant. It has to be meaningful. There needs to be some urgency, a legitimate call to action. You know, ultimately, we're kind of balancing this thing. You're either going to be very personal or very professional, and either of those can work pretty well. What doesn't work is all the stuff in the middle. So, you know, we tend to push for the very personal and find that produces the greatest results and long-term benefits to the clients.
Right. That makes sense. No, that's interesting. And as you've ended up, you've done a lot of things. You've ended up working in a software company that focuses on marketing. In what ways, and you've seen kind of big changes in technology in the last 10, 15 years. In what ways do you sense that marketing really has changed a fair bit from back in the day? And talk to us a bit about that.
Well, you know, when I started as a copywriter, okay, this is now 30 years ago, right? We were still reading David Ogilvy. We were still looking at how do you grab people and hold them. And, you know, he was the master of the long copy. Explain yourself, tell the whole story. Chiat Day was on the rise. Trout and Reese had just written positioning. And that was a big switcheroo for us. We were like, positioning, finding that place in the mind of the viewer or the listener. You know, the radical change has been the online world. And it's primarily because now we can really measure things. You know, we have real analytics. So on the one hand, I thought, you know, really the online world, to me, and all of the challenges I'd faced through all my years of marketing, it was the answer to a prayer. Now we could justify the expenditures. We could put them right up against the sales they generate. Even if we were talking about things like customer satisfaction and loyalty, we had tools. We could say, oh, yes, we'll look at the Net Promoter Score. There are these tools we have now. Of course, here's what's funny. You know, when all that stuff first came up, we thought it was all so awesome. And now you can still go to Dreamforce and you can wallow in analytics galore. But it's a little like facts in a political campaign. You know, that any of the facts can be bent and twisted. I think they can be extremely misleading. You know, and one example is a lot of times when Voodoo is in the initial sales process of talking to a prospect and hoping to convert them into a client for us, they'll ask us these open-ended questions, or actually to be very specific, they'll say, what open rate do you generate on your emails? What's the click-through rate to the videos in your campaigns? I get it. Those are good questions. But here's an example of how this can be twisted. If you think about an open rate, for example, we have a client, this just happened last week, so it's very fresh in my mind. We have a client and we helped them design a campaign that had an email with a very specific kind of subject line. And the subject line was both personal and trying to determine that this viewer, this person who might click to open it, actually was interested in this topic. Better yet, if they clicked through to watch a video, we really knew they were interested. And they said to us, well, that subject line is way too specific. You know, we've found that a general subject line like checking in works much better. Well, yes, you may get a higher open rate with a line like checking in because people don't know what they're opening, right? What am I opening? Checking in? Sure, I'll check that out. And that might be something someone would send you, a friend or something like that. Of course, when they find out it's some company they don't care about, it didn't matter that they opened ultimately. So we said to them, you know what, be a little bit more specific. And we told their biz dev reps, we're going to be specific this time. That means you're going to get a little lower open rate. However, when people do open it, we're going to know they care about this topic. If they click through to watch this video, we know they really care. So when you get your report tonight that says these 50 people opened and these 10 watched the video, now you know who to call. And of course, the business development reps, once they got that, they really got it and they got excited. So
yeah, no, that's great. That makes sense. Yeah, that does. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think there's so much data now through the web about how people behave and what they do. It's hard to know what to make sense of it at times. Well, and just, I guess the last question to wrap up, I asked you what's changed in the last 15, 20 years or 30 years since you started work in marketing. I mean, what stayed the same for you? What is sort of at core still basically still true?
Well, that's actually kind of a funny question. I think it's still an art posing as a science. And I think it still has innumerable variables, and there's a whole lot of BS floating around. Ultimately, and I'm being a little cynical here, it's still a bunch of creative geniuses trying to push messages at people who don't really want to hear them or be interrupted. So that kind of plays back to me about a different way of approaching this. So this is why I believe that the more you can give people a real choice and respect them and their time, the more successful you're going to be. And that's really the philosophy that we've built Voodoo on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Robert, that's great. Hey, and that makes sense. And as someone who receives a lot of marketing stuff through the web, that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, look, thanks for taking time. And it was great to catch up a little bit, learn something about Voodoo. And I hope we'll get to circle back with you to get more detail.
I would love it. I had fun.